Welcome to another Commonwealth Conversation. I am Ryan Gilchrist. This is We Virginians. We're talking about the aviation industry as it impacts Virginia today, and joining us to discuss that, we have Mark Flynn, Director of the Virginia Department of Aviation. Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Perry Miller, President and CEO of Richmond International Airport. Welcome, Perry.
Thank you.
Joining me, as always, is Marisa Porto. She's an executive in residence at Hampton University and a longtime newspaper editor and publisher. Hello, Marisa.
Hello, nice to see you all today.
So we've had a previous discussion about aviation, Marisa, but we've got a different set of experts this time that can, I think, talk a little more about how broadly this is impacting Virginia. Take it away.
Well, I'd like to ask, maybe we can start with you, Mark, about the sort of overall drop in traffic and state sort of cutbacks in employment, other issues that have come because of the coronavirus. How do you think aviation will look by the end of 2020? What will that look like for us in Virginia?
Well, right now, pretty much every airport from National Dulles to Richmond to Roanoke, Lynchburg, Newport News, Norfolk, Charlottesville, Shenandoah Valley, they've been seeing about a 90 to 95% decrease in commercial traffic. So what that means, they've also seen, in Perry's right in the trenches with it, is all the concessions that they have, the concessionaires that are operating, the restaurants, the newsstands, the coffee shops, the car rental, the Lyft, Uber, all of that feeds airports and works at airports. All of that has also stopped. So right now we're in the bottom of the trough of this, I think. And you know, we see a certain amount of news about passengers' reluctance to get back in airplanes, even when the government is allowing people to travel and you can go to your destinations. We do expect that corporate America will fly more, probably because they do have to go to the factory sites and all of that they need to serve. But the tourists are probably going to stay home more, and that'll be less just leisure travel. We also probably are going to see an uptick in the non-commercial corporate flights. That is, the corporations that own aircraft will be sending their own people. We're already seeing them sending their people to their factories on their own aircraft. The fractional share industries sort of maybe limping along a little bit better than the air carriers. So in business traffic, I think we're going to see, you know, a fairly steady use, an increased use of non-commercial service to get their people places. That's not maybe a huge percentage of the overall number of passengers. You know, normally in Virginia, we have, or excuse me, in the United States, we have 3 to 3.5 million people a day that get on an airliner. And now we're, like I say, we're seeing 95% of that is gone, and with a slow climb back. Of course, the other thing that about the court, as we go towards the end of calendar year 2020, is what happens if the scientists' worst predictions come true and there's a resurgence in the fall. You know, people were a little bit slow to react, of course, the first time, understandably, but we're all really hesitant to do things together now. And if there is a resurgence, boy, I think it's just going to really be a tough hit. So that's a possible unknown that we'll face.
All right, Perry, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in your area and sort of what the effects have been and what you see for your organization?
Sure. As Mark mentioned, there's been a national impact with regard to the coronavirus. I heard one of the associate administrators of the FAA mention that just about 68% of the aircraft that normally fly is now grounded. The effect of that has been, as Mark mentioned, a 95% decrease in passengers traveling. That has had a rippling effect. We have experienced that same impact here with the traveling public. We've experienced at least a 95% decrease in the number of passengers flying. We're accustomed to seeing 180 flights a day. We're down to about 30 flights a day. We're accustomed to seeing, approximately 4 million passengers that travel through here in a year. We don't expect to see that next year. It's difficult to gaze into the crystal ball, but we believe that we'll see a significant increase. Decrease well over 1 million passengers. That's a dramatic impact because, as you are well aware, and as was previously mentioned, the passengers that travel contribute to the revenues generated, the non-aeronautical revenues generated at the airport for concessions, such as food and beverage, for utilizing our parking facilities, rental cars, transportation network companies such as Uber and Lyft that was mentioned. We have 11,000 parking spaces here, which we're accustomed to seeing 90% occupied. When the coronavirus hit, it took us down to about 200 spots utilized. So it's been a significant impact here.
The Act has brought about $310 million in federal funding to the Commonwealth. Can you tell us a little bit about how that helped, Mark? And then talk a little bit about, do you expect more funding to help the Commonwealth, or what's your expectation for that?
Okay, well, first of all, as to how the CARES Act is being used, the part that goes to airports, it was about $308 million to the air carrier airports and $1.5 million to the general aviation airports. Part of that translated into, normally when an airport does a project, extending a runway, building a ramp, that kind of thing, there's a federal share, 90%, 8% state share, 2% local. Well, in the CARES Act, those projects, I think, all go to 100% federal for anything that had already been approved in 2020. So that helped keep a little bit of the capital work alive, the infrastructure work alive. So fortunately, in the CARES Act, and I think it was really a wise decision, the airports are fairly free to how they use the money. They can use it for anything that they can use other federal dollars for. And I know, Perry, you're having to watch that very closely. Your finance people are. Every airport has to make sure that it's using, can justify how it's using the money. But it does help keep these the commercial airports particularly alive. For a commercial airport, the issue is, what is the cost per enplanement that the airlines have to pay? How much does an airline have to pay for every passenger, pay the airport for every passenger that gets on an airplane? Normally that cost per enplanement is reduced by the restaurants, the rental car income, the newsstand income, all of the other kinds of income that an airport makes. Well, as we talked about, those monies are not there. So hopefully it looks like maybe the CARES Act will help airports to keep the cost per enplanement down, so that as the airlines pick back up, they will decide to come back to Richmond, to Newport News, to Norfolk, places like that. The airline industry is a for-profit industry, and each aircraft is a huge investment. They are going to send that every airplane where it makes the most money. So the fact that a Richmond, and I'm not picking on Richmond, this just is hypothetical, the fact that a Richmond had so many flights a day before doesn't mean that they'll have that many flights after. If a Richmond airport, if any given air carrier airport can't make it help make it a money-making deal for the airlines. We saw that, of course, at Newport News, what Delta Airline has pulled out for now. And the question is, will they come back? Will Newport News be able to make itself attractive? And that's the work that I think we all collectively, each airport and the Commonwealth, have to do. Will we see more money? you know, do you have a quarter we can toss? We probably we will. Uh, you know, probably we will. So how that gets distributed to airlines and airports, don't know. Um, and I would say, and Perry, I don't know what your experience has been, but I would say that the monies to the funds to the airlines and the funds to the airports sort of go hand in hand. I mean, it's not like one versus another. Um, they both needed the money. Both groups need money in order to be able to provide the services to citizens.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. In order for this industry to be sustained, it's going to take a collaborative approach. I think when the federal government issued the CARES Act funding to both airlines and airports, that was an effort to ensure that the industry would be sustained. I think also coupled with that was a requirement for both the airlines and the airports to focus on employee retention. For example, the airports, for us to be able to accept those funds, have to retain 90% of the employees that we had prior to the acceptance of the funds. I think that was a good move.
Interesting.
So this is coming, the pandemic is coming at the end. It sort of interrupted a boom period for airlines and the aviation industry. Clearly, during any period where business is good, there's staffing up and seeking more employees. This is going to put a real hitch in the employment issue. Isn't that correct, Mark?
Oh, very much so. January of 2020, it was a fantastic time to be a young person going into aviation, whether it's being instructed to be a pilot, to be a mechanic, to be a scheduler, to do whatever in the airlines at an airport. You could just get a great paying job with a lot of security. And then the coronavirus hit, and all of that has just fallen off the face of the earth. Perry talked about the CARES Act requiring retention of employees. Well, again, if there's not an additional, if we have a resurgence in the fall, or if things haven't gotten a lot better in the fall, and the airlines run out of that CARES Act obligation to retain their employees, there are going to be a lot of unemployed pilots, mechanics, looking for jobs. So the kids who had gone to school recently looking for, and we're on the sort of the bottom rung of the employment ladder, they're going to find they're not on the ladder anymore. It's going to be a real tough time. Yeah. And I'll say one of the big efforts that the Department of Aviation has had ongoing for the last couple of years, several years, but really picked it up in last year, 2 years, is getting access for underserved communities, kids in underserved communities, K through 12, to understand that they have opportunities for a job in aviation. We work with the Military Aviation Museum down in Virginia Beach, where they have a teacher who goes to schools and teaches, particularly in underserved minority communities, exposes them to the opportunities. Perry, you've been here at our hangar where we've brought in something like 100 kids so far, maybe a little over 100 kids, to see every aspect of jobs. And so, that was great. It had a lot of promise for them. And for the next year or so, that rug has been pulled out from under us all.
Perry, what does that look like for an airport like Richmond? Hiring works best when it's a continuous process. This has interrupted that. How does that affect your operation?
Yeah, I'm a bit concerned about that. I mean, this one of the negative aspects of the stimulus packages is created a sense of complacency in some people where they feel like they're benefiting more by staying home. So it's getting increasingly difficult to hire people, even though we're in a point where there are hiring freezes and people aren't actively seeking employment. There are some critical positions that need to be filled, and so the difficulty here is that how do you make work now attractive to people who develop this complacency?
So, Mark, you have more of a, a view that's statewide. So maybe you can tell us, we talked a little bit about workforce development. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about capital projects and whether you've seen any decline in requests for, capital project funding across the state. Where has that left some of the local organizations?
Yeah, well, for the projects that are out there now that were funded that were in 2020 FAA funding cycle, those are now 100% federal. So those are good to go. They're in good shape. But for the next go round, the air carrier airports do pay their own way. They issue their own debt. Their revenues manage to pay for their growth for the most part. With the state's help, with the state's participation, with the FAA's participation. General aviation airports, the Chesapeake Airport, Suffolk Airport, Hampton Roads, places like that, they generally, they are an arm of or a function of their localities. They may be an authority, but the localities are members of the authority, or it may be owned by a locality itself. So those airports, the general aviation airports, they don't have that revenue flow, or they don't have the revenue flow that air carrier airports did have. So that means when they're going to do a project and there's a local share, either 20% local or 2% local, depending on the kind of project where the FAA is involved, then they have to go to their city council or their county board to say, we need $500,000 for this project. Well, you can imagine for the next 1 or 2 fiscal years, where you have local governments who are laying people off, they're trying to keep their most basic core services going: education, fire, rescue, pick up the garbage, get the sewage and water supplied. And an airport comes in and says, we need to do this so we can grow for the future. The city council is inclined to say, nah, I'm sorry, not this year. You're going to have to wait a year. So I think we're already seeing a reduction in the number of applications we've had for funding from the Department of Aviation, from the state. I think we're going to continue to see that for the next fiscal year anyway.
So to get back to where we were before the pandemic, we need some folks to travel. So I guess I ask, what efforts is Virginia making to allay fears of the traveling public about safety, since the airlines has been really one of the main drivers of the pandemic early on. So I guess I'd like to ask, if I'm traveling tomorrow, how do I know I'm going to be safe on an airline in Virginia?
That's a great question, because restoring consumer confidence is one of the most important aspects of getting people to travel again. And I believe it's going to take a collaborative effort between airlines, airports, and the federal government, because those 3 entities primarily interface with the public as they travel. The federal government interfaces with the public as it screens them. The airport is an important entity because people travel through the airports. The airlines are an important entity because people fly on the aircraft. So it's going to have to be a concerted effort. And I think that there's going to have to be some guidance from the medical community to say, this is what safe looks like. We can do all we can in terms of creating the atmosphere of safety. For example, we can make you feel as though we are putting forth a concerted effort to make sure that the environment is safe. And in fact, that's what we do. We spend a lot more time cleaning while people, in an effort so people can see that that's taking place. We clean in the high touch areas. We clean that more frequently, and some of the times that we would normally clean things in the evening, where it's more conducive to get to those places, we make sure we do it in an obvious manner. And I think that's important, because that communicates to people that we're doing what we can to be safe. What's going to be equally important is that the airlines do the same thing. For example, somehow the airlines has to be able to convey to the passenger what they're doing with the air that people are breathing. Now, a lot of aircraft have very efficient filtration systems, but it's not being communicated. So that is an important aspect of how the airlines can help convey the consumer confidence. The TSA is also doing things to enhance social distancing and ensuring that they are not, or they're participating as much as they can to mitigate the spread of the virus by, providing their employees with the proper PPE and guidance in terms of social distancing. So a lot has to be done in that area. And as I mentioned, I think it's going to take a concerted effort and a collaborative effort from all of those entities.
Mark, is there anything that Virginia intends to do sort of across the board to help in this area?
Yes. First of all, we have basically advertising dollars available for all airports. They put up billboards, do PSAs, all that kind of stuff. So that's an actual current tool we have that airports can use, and I'm sure we'll be doing more of that. Then, in addition, we're exploring anyway the possibility of providing additional funding or freeing up the use of current funding by the air carrier airports to help them be as healthy as they can financially, so that, again, what I talked about before, when the airlines start flying again, the cost per enplanement is down so that it's attractive for airlines to return. We've all seen that the airlines are doing a lot of work to try to educate the flying public. I mean, I didn't know that the engineering is on the, like Perry just said, on the newer aircraft, the filtration system is a HEPA filtration system, which is sort of state of the art. It's actually probably cleaner than better air than you're getting some other places if you're down on Main Street right now. But yeah, Virginia is we're all playing a little bit of a catch up here, but Virginia is working on how to help educate the public, help airports educate the public, and then 3, have the commercial airports be in a healthy condition themselves financially, so that when it's time to start flying, people are flying again, they'll be ready.
Do you know if there are public policy discussions that you see happening right now that perhaps will play out in the legislative session in January in the aviation, in the aviation industry in Virginia?
Actually, it could be as early as August. And this is, I mean, I'm not speaking for the administration right now because it hasn't really gotten that far. The administration's doing its work now to prepare for an August special session. But we're definitely going to be pushing for funding being available for air carrier airports to do the things they need to do to be in business. It's sort of ironic, I guess. Last year, the General Assembly passed, and it's in the budget, a new airline service incentive fund operated through the Secretary of Commerce and Trade. And it's $1.2 million funding for over the 2 fiscal years to basically attract new airlines to come to Virginia's airports. Well, that may well get repurposed for the kinds of things we've been talking about this morning.
What are the, I have one last question just to wrap it up, but what are the long-term effects? I mean, you see, I've read some news stories about, smaller airports closing and in different areas. I've read about the, research about an uptick in private aviation, sort of business aviation to sort of keep you off the commercial flights. I've read about less international travel. What are the long-term effects this pandemic will have on aviation in Virginia? I guess we could start with Perry locally and end with Mark.
Sure. I'm optimistic about the travel. there's a significant difference between what's happening now with the COVID-19 virus and what happened with 9/11. 9/11 was a single event, and people were able to see the implementation of a strategy that would help protect them from recurrence of such event, which was the establishment of the TSA, which screens passengers so that they can feel reasonably safe about boarding an aircraft. This is different because, you know, we don't have anything right now that says you're safe. We don't have a virus
Vaccine.
a vaccine. Thank you. We don't have a vaccine in place right now that says, okay, if you take this vaccine, you'll be okay. So I think the effects will have to be endured longer, but I do think that at some point passengers will start traveling again. It's odd because what we've seen here is that at the onset of the virus, most travelers were essential workers. Here recently, we've seen the addition of travelers that just want to get out. Now, they don't travel long distances. They travel to places like Boston and Atlanta to connect, but we've seen visitors, friends and relatives flying. So that was peculiar to me. I didn't expect that.
Okay. Mark, maybe you could tell us what you think the long-term effects would be in Virginia. So maybe, you know, not just this year, but, you know, 2-3 years from now, what are we expecting?
Right. Well, and as Perry said, when there's a vaccine available, that'll be the game changer, as we all know. Mm-hmm. But already we've seen a change to doing things like, what are we using, Zoom? You know, the business community is getting used to doing business this way. If that continues, and you know, we know that there are software engineers that are working on something that makes Zoom look archaic. I went down to the Lockheed Martin facility, research facility in Chesapeake, where they showed demonstrations of people standing up, having a virtual meeting that's like a Zoom thing in a sort of a 3D. And one team was in Europe and one team was in the United States. You know, we see more of that. Then why would, if you're a corporation, why would you spend the money to send somebody to a facility across the country or across the world when you can do it in a meeting like that? And Perry, you have a lot more specific information about this than I, but it is, as I understand it, for the airlines, it's the business travelers and the first class travelers that really make the money for the airlines.
They do.
Right. Yep. And they need the tourists, the leisure travelers to fill the airplane for sure. But it's so if that trend continues, where we enter a new world where at least when you're not having to go into a plant and work on a machine, but when you're just doing office kinds of meetings, if those are done in a new way, instead of flying to St. Louis or whatever, they have a virtual meeting, then that'll be a profound change to the airline industry.
Yeah. Now, what that may result in is increased fares, because the airlines will still have to fill those planes, and it could be increased fares, or it could be a decrease for visitors and the like who want to go see new destinations. So it's I don't know. It's like Mark said, you got a coin to flip to see what the future will hold. But you know, I think I'm optimistic that there'll be an increase soon.
It sounds like in some ways we expect it to get better, and in some ways we expect it to change forever.
There will be a change.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to talk with us today. Thank you so much. It's great to have your expert thoughts and insights into what's happening in the aviation industry today. So thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Marisa. Thank you again to Mark Flynn and Perry Miller. for your time today. For those of you who are watching this video, we appreciate you. If you've watched this far, surely you can spare us a like. Please subscribe to the channel. More conversations are coming. For now, thank you very much.
Thank you.